think I probably started work at about the age of 3. We know that people tend to have more careers now, don't they, than, I've done this same thing for 40 years, but in very different ways. And that may not be the future for the new generation.
Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of View from the Hill, the podcast from Tile Hill, where we speak to leaders in local government. Today, I'd like to welcome onto the pod Executive Director of Children's Services at Dorset Council, Theresa Leavy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, I'm very grateful. Thanks, Jay. It's good to be here.
Glad to hear it. I'd like to start off on a topic which I think is often overlooked for the journeys of people that do lead the councils. I want to speak about sort of early life and the journey towards what the journey towards what brought you into the career that you're in now. So do you want to give me a bit of context and talk to me about that initially?
Yeah, thanks. So, I guess I kind of feel like so much began and kind of continues to be on the shoulders of the giants that were my parents, frankly.
Right.
And, I really firmly believe that should we see further, it's only because they stand on the shoulders of giants. And my mum and dad were both Shill. Irish immigrants, like so many were in the 1950s, and came to England with the kind of call to work. There's difficult times in Ireland, frankly, not enough work. So, the story really hasn't changed, has it, over so many decades? People coming here to work, to be purposeful, and living sometimes in difficult conditions. So certainly they were both from a very rural Irish background. My father was one of 18 children and my mum was one of 10. So family is large in my world. And
it's friends at that point.
It's often the case, I have to say. And I'm one of 7 children, so they went on to have 7 children. And I'm actually not the eldest, although sometimes I feel like I behave like that role in my family. I'm actually 6th in 9. 6 girls and 1 boy. And, living in England at that time, working hard, times were tough. It was a hard job for them. We lived in, a place where there was lots of warmth and lots of love, but also lots of real challenges around poverty, which became very exacerbated when my father, I was about 18 months, and he was cycling to work on a building site from Windsor to Wickham. And those of you who are maybe familiar, that's quite a cycle for doing the hard physical days of work. And he was hit by a truck and ended up paralysed, spent a very long time in Stoke Mandeville Hospital. And there was my mum with 6 little children. What we would now call no recourse to public funds. Because in those days it was very much, on your own.
Yeah.
So she worked really hard. So I sometimes reflect that I think I probably started work at about the age of 3, because I would go with my mum to her cleaning jobs, because that was how she was going to keep us all fed, and I would have my own little jobs in that place. And I tell that story not because of sentimentality, but because we need to be realistic about when families are struggling. Life is grey in corners and challenging in places. Was that 3-year-old where she needed to be? No, probably not. But was it done with love and care and concern? Absolutely. So the complexity of what our families live with and what we need to work with is not always, even when people are doing their very best, we can have a real sense of, is that good enough for those children? And I think that in itself brought me along the way. So I often say, I was at risk. I took risks as a young person, for sure I did. I had a real challenging time in school, and I didn't go straight to university, for sure. And now I manage risk. And I think that along the way, you hold those things lightly and know that our families with challenges are us. And it's one of my absolute mantras, is that we are the same. And if we start to see ourselves as different, better, and we start to other our families, that's when we're going to really make mistakes.
Yeah. Wow. Did that upbringing determine how you do your role, how you view and how you kind of do the job that you're in now? I mean, having had sort of lived experience of, not necessarily care or the kind of children that you'd help, but going through just difficult circumstances. I think that's what Children's Services as a whole tries to address, isn't it? Try to give equality of opportunity, or as much or as close as possible as you can to every child, as much as possible. So how much did that upbringing, those difficult days, determine how you operate in your role currently?
So look, for sure, the drive that often immigrant parents give their children around. I mean, they worked so hard to give us the education that they wanted us to have better lives than they had. That's a real strong message. And does that drive me now? Yes. Would I describe myself as driven? Probably. Do I try and temper that and make sure that I'm not overly driving others? Yeah. Absolutely. But it also kind of gives me a real sense of knowing that so many of our families just want better for their children than they have themselves, and they are the same. Now, we have to be absolutely mindful, and my early career was all about child protection specialism. Not everybody is in that category, and if we forget that, then that's when things get dangerous too. So holding those complexities for my staff, I think, has been really important, making sure that people understand that mostly we must work with people, we must support them to be their very best selves, but always keeping that very curious, forensic, slightly concerned eye to making sure that we know when those are not the circumstances and we can act effectively.
Sure. So could you take me through the journey of how you initially got started in social care or social work? Was it through uni, the way people do now, or I don't know what the pathways were back then, to be honest. So shed some light on that if you can.
Yeah. So I wasn't able to finish my A levels at school.
Yeah.
They weren't delighted to keep me on, frankly. In fact, they refused to. So that was okay. I kind of look back on that and think actually that was a blessing in disguise. It didn't feel like it at the time because I really wanted to pursue a kind of a role into university. But anyway, I ended up going to further education college, and I was rescued by a fantastic woman called Miss Betty Keane, who is sadly no longer with us. But she was one of those people who, if you're really blessed, and I think most people do have those people, you meet in life who see you, who really see you and really get you. And that was Miss Betty Keane for sure. And she supported me through what was then a sort of pre-social care course, which was an amazing thing because not only were you doing some social care learning, but you were also able to take your A levels alongside that.
Oh, wow.
So that you were prepared to take back onto your route of where you wanted to get to. And that was just inspired. I really think we need to do more of that. I then left that college and went into, my first job was in residential children's homes. I was 18 and the oldest young person there was 17. It was, thankfully, a very good place, very good staff, and a good leader, but the potential for it to be very wrong was very clear. But there was loving care in that place. And again, another place where I met people who met their children with love. And again, I consider that a real blessing 40 years ago. It wasn't always like that for sure. It wasn't like that for all children in residential care. But I still see some of those young people, they're the same age as me now, that we have when we share grandchildren. We share those conversations. I know they had an okay time. Residential care can be very tough. It's tough to deliver and it's certainly tough to live in. But I spent a number of years then working in residential care, then went on to do my university qualification for a sponsorship scheme in the local authority, which helped me to get back on track. But again, during those years, there were so many people I met who said, I see you, I know where you need to be, and coached me and supported me and led me to be where I needed to be. So for me, I absolutely don't pull up the rope ladder. I want to keep giving all sorts of people the opportunities to get into qualified positions if they want to. Unqualified position work is also really powerfully impactful on our families. But I absolutely support significant apprenticeships in social work or family work or youth work in the local authority that I'm in at the moment. And the people who come into that have often missed the boat, as I had, or for other reasons too, in terms of having their family young and other things. So I really firmly believe that that's so important to keep giving people those opportunities. And I'll continue to do. One of the last things I've always said, one of the last things I'd ever cut in a budget situation would be that kind of sponsorship of people to get to where they need to get to.
Off the top of your head, then, this isn't probably targeted towards the Tile Hill community, but you're speaking about like pathways into it. Could Could you give us a bit of an overview of what exists for maybe a young person who might consider getting into social care? Because I didn't really think we'd cover it, but actually I think that would be quite useful to know and to have accessible to younger people who might be looking at this.
Well, I think the really powerful thing about stable homes built on love, and particularly the family first pathfinder bit, which we've been leading in my local authority, is that it gives an opportunity to really understand that relationships, if we really believe relationships are key, then relationships with a family worker who may well be unqualified or differently qualified are just as powerful often as a relationship with a social worker. It's not to say that social work doesn't bring a real forensic expertise. It does, and people often want to have that opportunity. But increasingly across the country, it will be possible for people to start their career as a family worker.
Yeah.
And we certainly see teachers, police officers, prison officers, all sorts of people converting away from that original role into family work as they kind of find the opportunity of doing different work. And we know that people tend to have more careers now, don't they, than, I've done this same thing for 40 years, but in very different ways. That may not be the future for the new generations. But I think there's opportunities for people to come into the work unqualified, and then hopefully more and more local authorities pushing in supported qualification routes, either apprenticeship or sponsored step up to social work. So if you've got a good degree in another area, you can then convert that into a social work qualification through a range of programmes. The Open University works for some people. Some of my staff really like that. I mean, it wouldn't have worked for me. I'm a people person. I need to have the kind of the buzz of the conversation. And of course, they do some of that, but different routes for different people, I suppose. I think what matters most is that we really need to genuinely ask ourselves the question, if we think that we want a public service, if we want people who will provide care, attention, protection for our communities, we have to start speaking better of them. Okay. And the whole piece around being a social worker has not had the kind of positive press that it needs to have. Yeah. We face with people their darkest days. That's a real tough gig. And, my young son is a family law barrister. And we were just talking at the weekend, and he was saying to me, Mum, we see people in their darkest moments. And I was thinking, yes, we do. And I love him. I'm so proud of him. But I was thinking, and you get great respect from what bit that you do. Yeah. My social workers don't get quite the same. And we need to equalise that. I'm delighted that the NHS has been at least vocally supported, if not yet, financially, as much as they might wish to be. But we need to be much firmer and much clearer about saying, if we really want children to be protected, and I think we all do, and we really want families to be their best, the people who do that need to be celebrated, sung about, shouted about positively from the rooftops.
I fully agree. But I will say, I only have that viewpoint now because of the job that I do. I had no idea about it. I did economics and then finance at university. And not once, despite living in the UK since the age of 6, did I know about local authorities, about the fact that social care is probably one of the major services that local authorities provide. I think it's a misconception that contributes to a branding problem. It's an article actually I've written recently. Do you think that that's happened because of the branding problem that local government has overall? Mm-hmm. I think local governments they have to be the largest employer of social workers across the country as a group of organisations. Do you think the branding problem that the local authorities have is the reason that social workers don't quite get the respect, maybe, as you feel the NHS does overall? Or
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there is something. It's a really interesting concept, and it's an interesting question, I think, to explore. There's something about the old language of the council. The council's role, it's just a kind of a critical space in the way that, if you say the NHS, somehow there's this little bit of a rainbow glow around it. It's that bit, isn't it? So there's definitely a kind of a assumption that the council, of course, the council, the same people empty your bins. And if we think about it, if you speak to most people about the things that frustrate them with their council, it's often that, our bin didn't get empty today. So the sense of having those services sitting alongside actually is either a virtuous circle. You could say, well, actually, we are the people on your doorstep every day of the week. We are the people who you rely on to have this safe cup of coffee is safe because of trading standards in the local authority. Or your bin's empty and you're not got rats and hanging around the place because of the local authority. Or you can get to work on the roads because of the local authority. but it hasn't been celebrated in those
Yeah.
ways. And then when the local authority is also doing your housing and your social care for adults, and it may not be until your old mum or your old dad needs support that you come into touch with them.
Yeah.
You know, your kids might go to school, but you don't necessarily understand that the local authority, even in academisation, has got a really big part to play in making that a strong system. We don't enough talk about, I don't think, what local authorities do really well. And there's a tentativeness, I suppose, particularly in children's services. The sector of Ofsted is always there for us all. There's no other place, I don't think, that you end up with an individual, the Director of Children's Services, who is often really genuinely thinking, I mean, maybe head teachers in schools and goodness me, Paul Ruth Robinson, and those elements are for sure the impact of being the person who's responsible for that. Probably makes you a bit tentative about saying, actually, we do these things really well. And yeah, of course, we've got more to do. I mean, that's our other mantra, I suppose, always more to do, never done. But the reality is we don't really talk about the jobs that our workers do and our staff do that is so powerful, partly because the danger is you get into either, I always think of like we have this big pendulum that swings across children's services from the days of baby Peter to, you know, you're taking too many children into care. So you're not taking enough children into care. And the pendulum swung backwards and forwards. And I think of the pendulum as like a wrecking ball, because it swings too far both ways. And it makes anything balanced in the middle difficult to exist.
Yeah, okay. Fine. I'm trying to just process all that because it's interesting to hear it from, you know, directly from source, almost as someone who's doing the work on it. To get back onto sort of our community and how this conversation can help them in their ambitions to continue the good work that, you know, social workers, local authorities and leaders in the sector do. How would you describe the sort of come up in your career? So we spoke about how you got started into it. There's a big timeline between getting into social work and becoming a director of children's services. So I wonder if you could shed a bit of light on some significant assignments that you took on, or any learnings which contributed really heavily to eventually getting to the top job. Could you give us a bit of context on that? Yeah.
So firstly, I'd say I never made a conscious career plan. Okay. So, you know, I probably did early on. I've said I'm driven. I absolutely am driven.
Yeah.
But I've always been driven by the same thing. It's taken me a long time to work it out, but I've always been driven by improvement.
Okay.
Personal improvement and improving anything. So I also have always bought old trousers and done them up. It's the thing that kind of does it for me. You know, it's like making something better.
Yeah.
Leaving something in a better place than it was when you arrived is everything for me, rather than the position. And so that has served me so well. So I kind of, you know, people can have that ambition, they can have a position ambition, and that's fine. But for me, it was never that. It's just been a kind of per chance, really.
Yeah.
What's always been the ambition is to be making things better. However, I have to be honest, if I think about where I learned most, it was in those early years from those children in care. They taught me everything. You know, I've learned more over the years. You know, you learn more of the process, you learn more about organisational change, you learn all of that. But if I really think what made the biggest difference, it was listening deeply to those children's voices and what they wanted and what they needed. And those children's voices stay with me every day. And I can remember them like it was yesterday. And so as you go through then, making big changes in organisations, because those organisations need to change to be able to respond better to communities. And, you know, I genuinely wouldn't start with kind of how to be efficient or make savings. I don't have to, because I know that year in, year out, by simply making life outcomes better for children, I've also been able to turn on significant savings. It's just more efficient. You know, if you have a good life, you live well, you're happy, you're healthy, you're not going to be wasting money.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of life. Now, getting from an organisation that's in real trouble and organisations get into real trouble for all sorts of reasons, but mostly it's because somebody stopped listening and really thinking to what their communities needed, and they turned away from that for whatever reason, and I am intolerant of this, to be honest. I'm not intolerant of much, but I'm really intolerant of leadership that is bruising and damaging. You know, I'm quite a tough cookie. Right? I am. I know I am. And my staff would tell you that. And, they would say, but I have never raised my voice in work.
Right.
And I would be really concerned to have ever left anybody feeling bruised. I think you can be really tough with kindness and be really clear. And there's nothing kinder than saying to somebody who's not doing well, we need to do better. That's a kind thing to do, because there's nothing worse than being in a place where you're not performing high. And you know it, don't you? Yeah, we've all had those days when you go, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not really on top of my stuff. And what's worse is if somebody comes along and says, oh, what are you doing for? And you're left on your own. It's neglectful. It's not kind. That permissiveness is not a generosity at all. So for me, it's also always been about making sure that people know I want best for them. I will be high support and high challenge. And that's been the bit that more than anything else has supported me to make big transformational change over the years. And so as I go into anything else, I don't know what that new local authority needs yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm not there yet. And when I get there, I'll listen deeply to what they say, because they won't need, there's no point in giving them what the previous authority had. That's what they needed. It's a different thing. There are elements, of course there are. Local authorities have got similarities, but it's really important to listen deeply and then bring those people along. There are stars in every local authority. It doesn't matter what their grading is. I pay attention to that because it's important, but I also know that there'll be fantastic people in every local authority, inadequate or outstanding.
Yeah. Well, we certainly see that from the position we're in. And what we also see is the passion that a lot of people share towards a lot of what you just touched on. However, since I've joined Tar Hill and got, understood the world of local government, children's services and recruitment a bit better, the conversation around the DCS job has been a lot more negative than the way you're speaking about it, certainly. There's a common rhetoric that I've heard, and I'm not saying this is, the position that everyone takes, it's just certainly my experience. We're hearing that less people want to take that final step up from AD to DCS, for example, which is normally the route that people take. Why do you think that is? And, is there anything that, you'd like to shed light on for how maybe that rhetoric could change a little bit? Because you, in the meeting that we had before, you spoke about your role being a vocation rather than a job for you. But I suspect that's the case for, all the people that would have the ambition to take up the DCS job. Why do you think that rhetoric exists then? So why have I heard that over the last couple of years? And, what's led us to that point?
Yeah.
Big question, I know. But
sure. I know. And it's dangerous to kind of be casual with that, because it is a big job. It's an important job. And people who are doing it are taking it seriously, all of them. I don't believe anybody's kind of turning up going, once each day, but it's a tough job. The job has changed in terms of its stretch even. Okay. 15 years ago, the world of SEND was a very different world to the one it is now. So it's grown in its importance, I would say, maybe in our understanding of it, but also in the pressures that are in it.
Right.
If you look at even the rollout of the early years policy that's happening at the moment, a huge policy rollout that's come alongside the DCS's responsibilities with really very little extra capacity. So you've got, let alone the whole elements of child protection and the impact of child poverty and cost of living crisis on all of our families and communities across the country. So the kind of the expanse of the job is huge. Now, you either take one of two ways of that. You either go, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Because I've got all these other elements that I can focus on and I can think about. And hopefully I can get other people to be just as energized and engaged with. And then it's still exhausting at times, for sure. But it's not overwhelming and it's not depleting.
Right.
I suppose there is something. We talk a lot about resilience for children, but in my team at the present time, we tend to talk about spring back and how much you can kind of spring back from something that knocks you down. Now, that is something that's an internal kind of personality trait, but you can also create that in a team. So that bounce back from a problem, how much can you bounce back? And it's much easier to bounce back if when you kind of have a difficult day, you've got a team around you who are going, yeah, we've got you. Yeah, we've got you. You're okay. We'll hold this for a minute whilst you bounce back. And I see that in my amazing team all the time. So that bounce back ability, I know if I'm having a rough day, if I'm saying to them, I'm feeling it today, folks. I've got this to do or that to do or this committee to go to. I'm not really feeling it. I'll say, how can you help? Now, the first thing that happens when somebody says, how can I help, is you bounce back. You're already kind of going, all right, okay, I've thought this already, because I know I'm not on my own. Yeah, so being a strong team isn't just a nice thing to have. It's really nice, isn't it? It's really nice to be part of a strong team, really nice to be part of a place where you feel safe, where you know you can fail and be okay. But actually, that's what makes the DCS job possible. So my absolute first principle always in this job is, how can I support everybody else to be their best self? Because that's what's going to support me. You know, that's the reality. And yes, there are other people outside of the world who might be able to give you some guidance and some support.
Yeah.
But the reality is, when you've got your army alongside you, you know, and that's what I see my team as. I like an army of kind and generous individuals who will. It's interesting, I should say an army. So we've been working with the army.
All right.
On a camp in Dorset. A camp for eligible people coming from Afghanistan. In fact, they went to Pakistan before being able to come here because they never got out on the planes. And they're now coming to our country. They were the people that supported the whole army position in Afghanistan. And they're coming to stay in an army camp in Dorset. It's a tough place for them to land, but not as tough as where we come from.
Nice.
But our absolute determination was to make that welcome as warm as possible, give as much support as possible, because we firmly believe that, you know, unification into the country is going to be much more secured by having a really warm, welcoming life. So it's about kind of bringing that best place for, really, you know, moving on from where they are. But the general said to me recently, you know, Theresa, and they were kind of delighted by the way in which my team had worked. They said, but, you know, you have a particular phrase that you all use, which you talk about leaning in. Well, that's what you do. It's one of our Dorsetism, we lean in. I said, it's about kind of lean in, you know, help out. In the army, that means something very different. And you wouldn't want to be using that phrase.
What does it mean?
I think it means doing all
Oh my God, right.
Honestly, oh my God, well done. You're
No idea.
I have no idea at all. I'm there busy using the word without knowing what I mean at all. So, so just be careful kind of the phraseology you use. But apart from that, just get a tissue. Sorry.
It's all right, no worries.
So the leaning in, the supporting, the generosity, the kind of real, genuinely, meaningfully knowing that everybody's going to have a bad day and therefore you can all be helping each other out is what makes the job doable. It's tough right now. We've all got to make savings. We've all got to be in a place where we've got more to do and we have less money and less people to do it. That's just a truism. So when you've got that position, you have to be getting the most out of everybody you're working with. And that's the bit that often there isn't enough time to really develop your people. I've been really, really proud to work with Staff College. Some wonderful people there who are running some wonderful courses for the Aspen heads of service in the Southwest, ADs, obviously the DCS program. And that's been a great opportunity really to begin to develop people. But there isn't enough of that around.
So we touched on the leadership team around, even your job as the DCS post being so important, and here at Tile Hill, that's normally the level that we help people out with organisations. We help appoint their leadership teams often, and I wanted to ask your take on the competition between local authorities to attract the best people available to them. Is there anything that you found helps you in the recruitment that you've done, which has led to the most successful appointments in the team that you work with most regularly? That's a pretty open question, but if there's anything that comes to mind, go for it. We can specify for example.
Thank you. So I think firstly, one of the things that's been really important for me in my relationship with Tile Hill is very early on, I'd had conversations with David and others about, don't send me, they know me, they know my values, right? So don't send me somebody with values that are vastly different to mine. I like a bit of variety, but if your values are completely, so really important to me that there's not too much personal ego in the work we do, right? That obviously we've all got some, but if you're really in it just for you, you're probably not going to meld with my team.
Sure.
Because it's not how we well. So, and it's not kind to those people because, within 5 or 10 minutes having a conversation, if somebody's values are completely different to your own, don't you? So I think matching people's values is really important for me. So there's something around that. But I guess there's also something about I know, I think it's what's brought people to me and then come back and, I've got multiple people who have come back time and time again, is I want them to be successful. Actually makes me feel quite emotional. I really want people to be successful, and I want them to be able to be what they want to be. Okay, people come into this work and they could have gone into really bright, fantastic people in this world of local government. They could have gone into anything else, making more money probably. But they didn't. And they came here for a reason. I want them for their why, really. And I want to be able to support them to achieve their why, to achieve their purpose. Because there's no greater gift, I think. I used to love working directly with children. And then when I got further and further into the hierarchy, realising I was getting further and further away from the young people. The lovely thing about being a DCS is you get that close to them again. But I get further and further away from the young people. I began to realise that actually my purpose then was to support the people who were supporting them. And if I can support them to really achieve their own personal drive, their personal purpose, be successful, create the conditions for them to be successful, then that's everything. And that's what people look for now, I think. I mean, there's a real challenge about... I think there are more people actually coming in who want to go into the DCS world. They need support, for sure. But actually, I see a really lovely new cadre of young, ambitious people coming through, and that's fantastic. That is fantastic news. We lost too many social workers during the COVID period who didn't kind of carry on after their training, and that's the same across the whole of the public sector. And we've got to really think about that, because if we're losing people in their first early years because we're not giving them the protected environments they need, then we won't have that pipeline coming through. But I certainly see in my own and others' organisations, places where I'm privileged sometimes to do sector-led improvement work, some of those middle managers are fantastic, and they just need a year or maybe 3 of real strong consolidation and support in that kind of management leadership role. And again, the leadership role's got so much more complex, which either motivates you and makes you feel like, yes, so the system leadership of health and police and education, either that motivates you and you think, fantastic, let me at it, or it feels overwhelming. And where people are overwhelmed by it, there's 2 things really. They either don't know system, health, what's that mean? It's a nonsense, isn't it? So helping people to navigate that, to know that, to sharing knowledge, imparting that knowledge is really important. And being an organisation where you do that, so you're generous with saying, I appointed a couple of people recently who were real growth candidates. I knew that they weren't yet at that point for that appointment.
Yeah.
And part of their appointment was me saying to them, I know you can't do this here. It's okay. It's okay. Because we're all here to support you getting there, but we've appointed because of your talents, your values, your principles, your capacity to develop into that. And we need to be braver in doing that and then keep it coming.
That's definitely one of the factors that I wrote about as important for, competition between local authorities for the best people. How much emphasis they put, like you've just shown, on the development of the people they're bringing in. How much is that a theme across the board? So you must speak with other people in the region, sometimes internationally, in whichever events. I'm not sure which ones, but I'm sure that collaboration happens. Is that a common topic that's discussed amongst the DCS community, or even the children's social care leadership community overall? Or is that something you're particularly passionate about that's just shown through your experiences and your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have been focusing on development, but I'm not sure that we've yet had those kind of difficult conversations about how about we appoint people who we all know we can't do the job yet? Because that's risk, isn't it? There's a risk in that for sure. And we're in a risky business. So doing that can feel really alarming for people. And a good example is, so not all DCSs have got a social work background, obviously. Yeah. Many have got an education background, some have got neither.
Yeah.
Those, I can draw to mind 2 DCSs who I would have had fabulous time with when I was in their deputy position, and neither of them would have got a social background. Right? But they knew as much about social work as most of the social workers in that organisation, because they were learners, they were people who wanted to get underneath in their whittle. So, we've begun to debunk some of those things around understanding that you can have a raft of knowledge at a senior level. But I do think we need to be honest about, we're not going to get the finished article in all of these places. And therefore, we're going to have to take a risk. And if we're serious about that, that means we've got to be honest about that and say, well, let's have that kind of support plan around them, which is more than just going off into a course away from somewhere, but really thinking about how do we do that with our middle and frontline managers. I mean, the frontline manager job, I think is probably the hardest job of all. I think the team manager job is the one that if I look back and think which was the hardest job, that was it.
Right.
Because you are squeezed every which way. You are required to look after your people, your team, and to have all of that availability to them. Serve probably a service manager or a head of service and be a bit squeezed in between. And that's actually where you learn a lot of your skills, I think, about leadership and management. And we don't invest enough in those people.
Final question then from us. Is there anything that you'd like to tell the Tile Hill community, maybe the people that will watch this will be the ones that we work with and interact with regularly? Is there a message through everything that we've spoken about that you'd like to leave them with as the end of this episode?
Thank you, Jay. So firstly, just sort of struck my thinking, remember to support your young people who are not really doing so well in school, your young people who may be messing up, your young Theresas. Make sure that, you never lose hope and faith in them. Make sure you identify the Miss Betty Keens and others who are going to save them, who are going to love them into being. And if that person is also you, then love them into being. And when you've done that, then remember you've got that little person inside you too, who may have all those sense of self-doubt. And I love the fact that we call it imposter syndrome. We have fancy words for it. It's just that sense of, oh, can't you mean me, really? Is this really me? Am I really the person who's going to be stepping into that big new role? Yeah, make it be you. Because if you bring your heart and your loving care to the job, and you surround yourself with people who can really help you to bounce back when you have a hard time, you can be that person who just makes the difference to those young people in your community.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. I think it's an amazing story that someone who was struggling with school, there's a positive irony to them going into a DCS job, and it's an amazing note to end it on. Thank you so much, Theresa.
Welcome. Thanks, Jay.